Welcome back. Today, let's jump right in. We're looking at really the cutting edge of AI, how we push these large language models past just, chatting.
Right, getting them to actually reason through complex stuff. Think hard math problems, writing solid code, things like that.
Exactly. And our source for this is a really fresh paper from Mistral AI. They're introducing Magistral, their first model built specifically for reasoning.
And maybe even more importantly, the paper details the whole custom-built, scalable system they created from scratch using reinforcement learning to train it.
Yeah, that's the key. So if you're an AI researcher, an ML engineer, basically anyone trying to keep up, what we want to do here is unpack this paper for you. We'll pull out the core ideas, the stuff you really need to know.
Cut through the jargon, get straight to the insights.
All right, so before we dive deep, here's the quick summary, like the 1-minute version of what this paper is all about.
Okay, hit me.
So, Mistral AI is launching Magistral, first reasoning models, built using this brand new scalable pipeline they call reinforcement learning from verifiable rewards, or RLVR.
And the big deal is they built it all themselves. No distilling from other big reasoning models, no relying on existing traces, totally from the ground up.
Exactly. And the results? Pretty impressive. They got major boosts on reasoning and coding benchmarks. Think AIM24 live code bench.
Right, and they showed this works with pure RL for their bigger model, and also works when you combine RL with an SFT start for the smaller one, which is interesting because it shows RL isn't just for giant models.
Plus, and this is a bit of a surprise, this RL training actually preserved or even improved the model's other abilities like multimodal understanding and following instructions.
Yeah, the free lunch part. And it's all running on this efficient asynchronous infrastructure they designed, plus some really careful data filtering. Oh, and Magistral Small, the 24B parameter one, that's being open sourced.
Okay, that's the nutshell version. Now let's get into the weeds. So reasoning, obviously crucial if we want LLMs to do more than just, answer simple questions.
Yep.
This paper really leans into RLVR, right? Rewarding the model if its answer can be checked and proven correct.
Absolutely. And what strikes me is their whole philosophy here, instead of, say, distilling from a GPT-4 level model, they said, nope, we're building our own stack.
Fully in-house.
Yeah, their own RL infrastructure, their own data pipelines, training directly from their existing Mistral-based models. They really wanted to see how far they could push pure RL for these reasoning tasks.
Okay, taking the hard road, maybe.
Yeah.
So tell us about the actual models that came out of this effort.
Right, so there are two main ones they talk about, Magistral Small and Magistral Medium. Small is based on their Mistral Small 3, which is 24 billion parameters. Medium is based on Mistral Medium 3.
And how they trained them was different.
Yeah, that's the key distinction. Magistral Medium, the bigger one, was trained using pure RL, starting right from the Mistral Medium 3 instruct version.
Okay.
Magistral Small, being smaller, got what they call an SFT cold start first. So, supervised fine-tuning using some curated examples. Then they applied their RL method on top of that.
Gotcha. Pure RL for medium, SFT plus RL for small. That custom RLVR setup you mentioned must be pretty sophisticated then. How does it actually work under the hood?
Well, scaling RL for LLMs is notoriously difficult. It's one of the big engineering hurdles. Their system is distributed, asynchronous, and has three main parts working together.
Okay.
You've got the trainers, that's where the model weights actually get updated. Then generators, which take prompts and spit out the model's attempts, the reasoning chains, the answers, the stuff RL needs to learn from.
The rollouts.
Exactly. And finally, the verifiers. These are crucial. They take the outputs from the generators and score them based on those predefined rules. Is it formatted right? Is the math correct? Does the code work?
Yep.
And that generates the reward signal.
Okay, so generators churn out solutions, verifiers grade them, trainers learn from the grades. Sounds logical. What's the main bottleneck or the tricky part in making that work at scale?
The big challenge is managing those generators efficiently, especially for online RL, where you want the model learning from data it's generating right now. The problem is the outputs can be super varied in length.
Right. A simple math problem might be short. A complex proof could be pages long.
Exactly. And handling that mix efficiently without accidentally favoring the shorter, easier stuff is tough. Plus, you want the generators using the latest version of the model weights as much as possible. That's the on-policyness thing. You don't want it learning from an outdated brain.
Makes sense. So how do they crack that, balancing efficiency with using fresh weights?
Their key design choice was making the generations asynchronous. The generators just go. They run full tilt, producing outputs. As soon as one finishes, it sends the output off to the verifier queue. The trainers pull from that queue, calculate rewards, update weights continuously.
But if the generators are just running, how do they get the new weights from the trainers without stopping?
Ugh, that's the clever bit. When a trainer finishes an update, it broadcasts the new weights out to all the generators immediately. Even if a generator is like halfway through thinking about a problem.
Seriously, mid-thought.
Yeah. They use NCCL for this, which is super fast for GPU to GPU stuff. The generators just swap in the new weights on the fly. Now, the KV cache, the memory of the sequence so far, might be slightly based on the previous weights for a moment.
Okay, a little bit stale.
A tiny bit, potentially. But they found this didn't really hurt performance much, and the benefit was huge. The generators never stop. Maximum data generation, maximum throughput for the RL process, and it stays pretty close to being on policy.
That's a really neat piece of engineering. Okay, what about optimizing the trainers themselves? How do they handle processing all those variable length generations?
Good question. On the trainer side, they defined a batch not by a fixed number of tokens, but by a fixed number of completed generations, because lengths vary so much.
Right.
To pack these efficiently onto the GPUs, they break that batch down into mini batches, and then those into micro batches, which do have a fixed token size. They use a greedy packing algorithm to stuff the variable sequences into these fixed size micro batches with minimal wasted space.
Minimizing the padding.
Exactly. They mention this reduced padding by about 19% compared to simpler methods. That translates to significant compute savings when you're training at this scale.
Okay, so a ton of smart engineering in the infrastructure. Let's switch gears to the learning part, the RL algorithm itself, and crucially, how they design that reward signal. What algorithm do they actually use?
They went with a modified version of GRPO group relative policy optimization.
GRPO, yeah.
One nice thing about GRPO is you don't necessarily need a separate value function or critic model, which simplifies things a bit, but they did make some specific tweaks.
Like what?
Well, one thing they did was they actually removed the KL divergence penalty. That's often used in RL to stop the model changing too drastically from the original policy.
To keep it grounded.
Yeah, but they found with the GRPO, it wasn't really preventing divergence effectively anyway, and it just cost extra compute. So out it went. They also added some specific ways to normalize the loss and the advantage calculations within each batch, just to keep training stable.
Makes sense. Anything else major?
Yes, and this seems really important for reasoning tasks. They relaxed the upper bound of the policy clipping mechanism. They call it clip higher, eye high.
Clip higher. What does that do?
Okay, so standard clipping in things like PPO or GRPO prevents the model from making huge updates to probabilities it assigns to tokens, especially unlikely ones. It keeps things stable. But for complex reasoning, the correct path might involve a sequence of steps that individually seem really unlikely.
Oh, the weird intermediate calculation that turns out to be key.
Exactly. By increasing this upper clip threshold, they tuned A high to around 0.26 to 0.28. They basically gave the model more permission to significantly boost the probability of these rare but potentially critical reasoning steps.
So it encourages exploration of less obvious paths.
Precisely. It helps maintain entropy and diversity in the generations, which you absolutely need if you want the model to discover complex, multi-step solutions it wouldn't normally find. Oh, and they also filtered out entire groups of generations for a prompt if they all happen to get the exact same reward, because those don't give a useful learning signal, just noise.
That clip higher tweak sounds super important for discovery. Okay, so the model explores these paths. How did they tell it if a path was good? What was the reward setup?
Right, the reward structure. This is the core signal. They broke it down into 4 parts, evaluated sequentially. First up, formatting.
Gotta follow the rules.
You got it. The model had to use specific tags like think and think, format math answers with boxed, use markdown for code blocks, etc. If it failed, the format check. Reward 0. Done. If it passed, a small reward 0.1.
Okay, step 1 passed. Then what?
Then correctness. This was the big one. If the formatted answer was actually correct, it got a whopping plus 0.9 reward, bringing the total to 1.0.
How'd they check correctness automatically?
For math, they used rule-based checks and the SFT library to verify the answer inside the box tag. They even built in normalization to handle things like by 2 versus 0.5x. For code, they'd extract the code block, compile or run it C++ or Python, and test it against 20 hidden test cases they'd prepared.
20 tests. All or nothing.
All or nothing. Had to pass all 20 tests to get that 0.9 reward. Very strict binary correctness.
Wow, okay. Strict but clear. What were the other 2 reward bits?
Next was a small length penalty, just negas 0.1. It kicked in gently as the output got close to the maximum allowed length, say Lmax and Lcache. Not a hard stop, just a nudge saying, you're near the limit.
A gentle hint.
Yeah. And the last one was language consistency, worth plus 0.1. This was pretty neat. They translated about 10% of their English problems into other languages, French, Spanish, Chinese, etc.
Okay.
Then, for any generated solution, they used a fast text classifier to check the language of the original problem, the model's think process, and the final answer. If all three match the problem's language, bonus point.
Huh. That's clever. Just rewarding it for sticking to the language, rather than explicitly trying to teach it multilingual reasoning. Did they tell the model about these rules?
Yep, the system prompt laid out the formatting and language requirements. And interestingly, they found that adding phrases like be as casual and as long as you want to the prompt actually seemed to boost the model's exploration, its entropy, which helped the RL process.
It's wild how prompt details interact with training dynamics. Okay, let's talk data. Verifiable solutions were key. What went into getting that data ready?
Huge effort. Because the reward depends on verification, they needed math problems with clear answers and code problems with tests. Data curation was apparently a massive undertaking.
How'd they do the math data filtering? You mentioned it was tricky.
Yeah, they started with this enormous, noisy data set, like 700,000 problems. First, basic format filtering got it down to about 500K, but then they did this really interesting two-stage difficulty filtering. Stage 1 used Mistral Large 2 to take a first pass, trying to weed out problems that were obviously too easy or seemed impossible. Standard enough.
Okay. What was stage 2?
This is the cool part. They took a different model, a 24B parameter one, and trained it using their own RL pipeline on the initially filtered math data. So they made a pretty decent reasoning model first.
Right.
Then they used this new RL-trained model to reevaluate the entire original data set. The idea was a weaker base model might wrongly flag hard problems as unsolvable, but their stronger RL-trained model could actually solve more complex stuff, so it was better at identifying and keeping the genuinely challenging problems.
Using the student to teach the teacher almost.
Kind of. They also filtered out problems where even this stronger model disagreed with the supposed ground truth answer, suggesting the ground truth itself might be wrong. This whole process whittled it down to a much smaller but much higher quality final math set of about 38,000 samples.
That's a fascinating approach. What about the code data?
For code, they gathered problems from programming contests. Filtered for ones with solutions and tests. They had a whole process to check the tests, make sure they were consistent, sometimes even generated new tests. And they duplicated problems to require solutions in both Python and C++ to bulk it up. Ended up with around 35,000 code problems.
Okay, serious data work. So the infrastructure is built, the data is clean. Let's get to the payoff. How did Magistral actually perform?
They tested it on a whole bunch of benchmarks, AIM and Math for Math, Live Code Bench and Aider Polyglot for code, GPQA, Humanities Last Exam for broader STEM reasoning. Pretty comprehensive.
And starting with Magistral Medium, the pure RL one, what did they see?
This was the test case for their pure RL stack, right? Started from Mistral Medium 3 Instruct. They trained it in stages, ramping up data difficulty, allowing longer outputs, and the results were really significant.
How significant?
Check Table 2, Figure 1 in the paper. On AIM 24 pass at 1 accuracy, it jumped by nearly 50% compared to the base model. On Live Code Bench V5, about a 30% boost. Those are massive gains just from applying RL. It even held its own against models like DeepSeek R1 in some areas, which did use SFT.
Wow, okay, 50% on AN from pure RL is huge. What about Magistral Small? The 24B model with SFT, then RL. This is important for people maybe not running the biggest models.
Definitely. The goal here was the best possible 24B reasoner, started with Mistral Small 3 Instruct. The SFT Cold Start used high-quality traces from Magistral Medium's own successful RL runs.
So using good examples from the bigger sibling.
Exactly. They picked traces with correct answers and nice long reasoning chains. They also mixed in diverse public data, like Open Thoughts and OpenR1 CUD stuff said diversity was key for the SFT stage.
And then they hit it with RL.
Then they applied the RL pipeline to that SFT checkpoint. They mentioned using a slightly higher sampling temperature, 1.0, and a higher high, 0.3, specifically to encourage more exploration since the SFT model was already pretty focused.
And did adding RL on top of SFT make a big difference for the smaller model?
Yes. And this is a really key takeaway because it kind of pushes back against the idea that RL is only useful for distillation or only works on giant models. Table 3, Figure 5 show it clearly. RL substantially boosted performance beyond just the SFT.
Like how much?
Well, AMU 24 pass at 1 went from about 65% after SFT to over 70% after RL. Live code bench went from 52% to nearly 56%. Consistent gains across the board. It strongly suggests their RL method adds significant value even on top of a good SFT baseline on these smaller models.
That's super relevant for anyone optimizing models in that size range.
Yeah.
Okay, what about languages? Did the language consistency reward actually work?
Seems like it did. They tested Magistral Medium on AM 2024 questions they translated. Table 4 shows, yeah, there's a bit of a performance dip compared to English, maybe 4% to 10% depending on the language.
Did it answer in the right language?
Yes, that's the crucial part. It did do the reasoning and give the final answer in French or Spanish or whatever the input language was. So that simple plus 0.1 reward for staying consistent worked surprisingly well.
Okay, maintains the behavior, slight accuracy trade-off. Let's dig into some of the analysis. Did they find that learning to reason in math helped with code or vice versa? Any generalization?
Oh, absolutely. They did these cool ablation studies, trained one model only on math, another only on code, then tested both on both math and code. Clear cross-domain transfer. The math-only model got better at code than the base model. The code-only model got better at math. Table 5 shows this. It means the reasoning skills the RL is teaching are, somewhat general, not just task-specific memorization.
That's really promising. The model is learning how to reason, not just what to answer for specific domains. What else did they learn about the RL process itself, how the model changes?
They did this neat PCA analysis on the weight updates during the Magistral Small RL run. They found the RL was mostly pushing the weights along one main direction, a low-dimensional space that was strongly correlated with output length.
Length, interesting.
Yeah, figures 8 and 9 show it well. As the model moved along this axis during RL, both the average reward and the average length of its generations went up significantly. It seems the model basically learned. Longer, more detailed, step-by-step thinking often leads to the right answer and gets rewarded.
Right. So RL is teaching it to be more verbose and thorough in its reasoning. Makes intuitive sense. Okay, now, the really surprising bit. The multimodal improvements. How does training on text-only math and code make it better at understanding images?
Yeah, this was the free lunch they mentioned. Totally unexpected, but obviously very welcome. Remember, the base Mistral models are multimodal. They have vision capabilities built in. Even though the RL training only used text prompts and text-based rewards for math and code, the resulting Magistral Medium model showed significant improvements on multimodal benchmarks like MMMU, Math Vista, MMMU Pro.
How big were the improvements?
Pretty substantial. Figure 10 shows like plus 5% on MMMU, over 4% on MMMU Pro Standard, and a huge plus 12% on MMMU Pro Vision, which has lots of vision-heavy tasks.
Wow.
It seems the boost in general reasoning power, learning to think step by step, just carried over and helped it reason better even when visual input was part of the problem. No direct multimodal RL needed.
That is genuinely fascinating. A rising tide lifts all boats, kind of. Did this specialized reasoning training hurt its other abilities, like following instructions or using tools?
Thankfully, no. They checked instruction following and function calling, and Table 6 shows those abilities were basically maintained, maybe even slightly improved. So the reasoning gains didn't break other important functionalities.
Excellent. Preservation is key. Now, it's always useful to hear about things that didn't work. Did they share any lessons from failed experiments?
They did, which is great for the rest of us. One thing they tried was partial reward for code. Instead of the strict pass-fail on all 20 tests, they tried giving credit based on how many tests passed.
Seems reasonable. A denser reward signal, maybe easier to learn from?
That was the idea.
Yeah.
And they found training was faster, less data got thrown out because partial successes still got some reward. Looked promising at first.
Yeah.
But the final performance actually dipped slightly. About a 2% drop on live code bench, figure 11A. And the model didn't learn to generate longer reasoning chains as quickly, figure 11B.
Huh. Why do they think that happened?
Their guess is that while partial rewards are denser, maybe they're also fuzzier. Like, they might accidentally reward suboptimal strategies that pass some tests but aren't robust. The strict binary all tests passed signal, while sparser, might be a clearer guide towards truly correct solutions.
Interesting trade-off. Simpler but stricter might be better sometimes. What else didn't pan out?
They also tried using a standard entropy bonus in the loss function. That's a common trick to encourage exploration, stop the model becoming too predictable.
Right, keep it trying new things.
But they found it was really unstable in their GRPO setup, super sensitive to the mix of data. Figure 12 shows it could cause the model's entropy to just collapse, or sometimes explode, completely messing up training. Very unpredictable.
Yeah, instability is the enemy in large-scale training.
Exactly. They concluded it was much more reliable to manage exploration by carefully tuning that clip higher high parameter instead. That gave them more stable control over letting the model explore those less likely paths. They also confirmed that adding a standard KL penalty just seemed to slow things down without much benefit, echoing some other recent findings.
Okay, good practical advice there. Tune epsilon for exploration, maybe skip the standard entropy bonus or KL penalty in this kind of setup. They also do a quick run starting from open source data.
Yeah, just a small experiment. They took a Mistral Medium 3 model that had already been fine-tuned, SFT, on public reasoning datasets like OpenThoughts and OpenR1. A decent starting point.
And applied their RL on top.
Yep. And Figure 13 shows, again, substantial gains over just the SFT checkpoint. In that test, the RL-boosted model reached performance similar to DeepSeek R1 on math code stuff.
So it confirms the RL stack adds value even if you start from a strong, publicly trained SFT model.
Exactly. It underlines the power and maybe the generality of their RL method.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together then. What are the absolute key takeaways for someone listening to this trying to keep up with AI reasoning?
Well, first, this paper is Mistral planting their flag in the reasoning space with Magistral, built using this really impressive scalable RLVR pipeline they developed internally.
Build from the ground up.
Right. Key finding 1. Pure RL, without SFT, can deliver major reasoning boosts, as shown by Magistral Medium. Key finding 2. For smaller models, RL on top of SFT provides significant additional gains, which is maybe counter to some older assumptions and really important for practical applications.
And the tech behind it.
Their asynchronous infrastructure is a big deal for scaling online RL efficiently. Meticulous data curation, especially that two-stage filtering using their own RL model, was clearly critical.
And the surprises.
The biggest surprise was probably the free lunch text-only RL training unexpectedly boosting multimodal reasoning while still preserving things like instruction following. Plus, the practical lessons about what didn't work, like partial rewards or entropy bonuses versus tuning IRs, are super valuable. And they're not stopping here. The paper points towards using their own models' outputs to bootstrap further training, scaling up compute, and tackling even harder stuff like tool use, better multimodality, and agentic systems using this RL framework.
So, for you, the researcher or engineer listening, this work from Mistral offers a powerful example of how carefully engineered, scalable RL can significantly advance LLM reasoning. Think about it. A method that not only improves complex problem solving, but generalizes across domains, enhances other modalities unexpectedly, and maintains core functionalities. What kind of new possibilities does that unlock when our AI tools can reliably reason their way through challenges, not just retrieve information? Definitely something to chew on.